Good evening. The most extraordinary development emerging from Washington this week involves an unprecedented governmental attempt to completely reverse the historical record of one of America's most documented political events. The White House has fundamentally transformed its official narrative surrounding the January 6, 2021 Capitol assault, now characterizing the incident as a peaceful demonstration that deteriorated only due to law enforcement provocation. This official historical revision represents something entirely unprecedented in American governance. Through a newly launched website, the administration has inverted the established factual record, portraying the individuals who stormed Congress as victims of police aggression rather than perpetrators of violence. The site attributes responsibility for escalating tensions to Capitol police officers, claiming their deployment of crowd control measures transformed what officials now describe as an orderly gathering into chaotic confrontation. The revision extends to casualty attribution, with administration officials claiming law enforcement suffered no fatalities while asserting that Trump supporters died due to police action. This account contradicts medical examiner findings regarding Officer Brian Sicknick's death following assault-related strokes, while ignoring subsequent officer suicides and the extensive injuries documented among Capitol security personnel. The site simultaneously omits mention of the 140 officers who required medical treatment or the long-term psychological trauma many experienced. Perhaps most significantly, the website elevates constitutional interpretation that legal scholars across party lines have rejected as fundamentally invalid. Officials now praise Trump's position that Vice President Pence possessed authority to override electoral certification, characterizing Pence's constitutional adherence as betrayal rather than legal obligation. This reframing attempts to legitimize what constitutional experts universally recognize as an illegal power grab. The timing of this historical revision coincides with comprehensive pardons for nearly 1,600 individuals charged in connection with the Capitol assault. Administration officials characterize all recipients as patriotic Americans, a designation encompassing convicted violent offenders, documented extremist organization members, and individuals who brought weapons to the legislative complex. This blanket rehabilitation transforms criminal convictions into badges of civic honor while establishing political violence as acceptable democratic participation. Simultaneously, Trump has announced seizure of massive Venezuelan petroleum reserves, declaring that between 30 and 50 million barrels will transfer to American control for market price sale with U.S.-managed proceeds. This appropriation of foreign natural resources without international consultation represents perhaps the most direct assertion of imperial resource control in modern American history. Administration officials frame the seizure as benefiting both nations, though Venezuelan authorities maintain no formal agreement exists regarding the arrangement. The petroleum transfer carries significant economic implications beyond immediate revenue generation. Current market valuations suggest the seizure could produce between $1.65 and $2.75 billion in proceeds, though domestic impact will prove minimal given America's 20 million barrel daily consumption rate. More critically, the forced transfer may exhaust Venezuela's strategic reserves while establishing precedent for American appropriation of foreign energy assets under military pressure. These actions gain additional context through operational details revealed in classified congressional briefings regarding Maduro's capture. Administration officials described a complex military operation involving nearly 200 American personnel conducting urban combat operations in the Venezuelan capital. The engagement resulted in significant casualties, with 32 Cuban security personnel killed during firefights with American forces, while several Delta Force operators sustained wounds from hostile fire and explosive fragments. The human cost extended to the primary targets themselves, with both Maduro and his wife sustaining head injuries during their attempted escape from advancing American forces. Officials reported the pair struck a low doorframe while fleeing, requiring immediate medical attention following their apprehension. Court appearances revealed visible injuries consistent with these accounts, though administration representatives characterized the harm as incidental rather than intentional. The choice to collaborate with Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez rather than installing recognized democratic opposition leaders reveals pragmatic calculations driving policy decisions. Despite Maria Corina Machado's Nobel Peace Prize recognition and legitimate electoral victory, officials determined her inability to control existing security apparatus made her unsuitable for immediate leadership transition. Rodriguez's established relationships with military commanders and bureaucratic networks provided more reliable pathways for maintaining governmental stability while ensuring American resource access. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has developed personal communication channels with Rodriguez and her brother Jorge, who leads Venezuela's National Assembly, establishing direct diplomatic contact that bypasses traditional democratic institutions. Officials describe these relationships as essential for implementing American policy objectives while maintaining operational control over Venezuelan petroleum infrastructure and political decision-making processes. The broader territorial ambitions underlying these Venezuelan operations have gained unprecedented credibility through Trump's explicit statements regarding Greenland acquisition. What European leaders once dismissed as provocative rhetoric now receives serious diplomatic attention, with Danish officials publicly reaffirming sovereignty over the autonomous territory in response to explicit American annexation threats. Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller has declared that superior American military power justifies territorial seizure regardless of existing international agreements or NATO alliance obligations. Greenland's strategic value has increased dramatically due to climate-induced changes in Arctic accessibility. Melting ice coverage has opened new shipping routes while exposing rare earth mineral deposits essential for defense and technology industries. Chinese and Russian Arctic expansion has created superpower competition for resource access and strategic positioning, making American control over Greenland potentially decisive for emerging polar dominance. However, seizing territory from NATO allies would constitute unprecedented aggression, potentially destroying alliance structures anchoring Western security since World War II. European leaders warn that such action could trigger Article 5 mutual defense obligations while forcing allied nations to choose between American partnership and sovereignty protection, potentially fracturing transatlantic relationships beyond repair. The administration's justifications for these expanding military operations face credibility challenges when examined against historical accuracy and factual evidence. Trump's current approach creates ironic contrast with his previous criticism of presidential dishonesty regarding foreign conflicts, particularly his condemnation of President Bush's alleged deception regarding Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Officials now employ remarkably similar tactics to justify Venezuelan intervention through unsubstantiated claims about drug trafficking organizations and exaggerated threat assessments. The legal case against Maduro relies heavily on assertions about a supposed major narcotics cartel that exists more as bureaucratic abstraction than operational reality. Recent indictments significantly dilute earlier claims about this organization's structure and influence, treating it as a loosely connected patronage system rather than the sophisticated criminal enterprise initially described. Similarly, alleged connections between Venezuelan leadership and transnational gangs lack substantial evidence despite forming key justifications for military intervention. Administration officials regularly employ statistical claims that defy mathematical scrutiny when describing intervention benefits. Assertions that individual operations save tens of thousands of lives appear inflated when compared against actual overdose death statistics while broader claims about prevented fatalities reach numbers exceeding total American drug deaths across multiple years. Such exaggeration undermines legitimate policy arguments while creating unrealistic expectations about intervention effectiveness. Public opinion polling reveals profound disconnect between administrative ambitions and democratic consent regarding these expanding territorial and military commitments. Despite Trump's electoral victory, surveys consistently demonstrate overwhelming opposition to expansionist policies across party lines. Only 1/4 of Americans support hemispheric dominance policies, while even Republican backing remains tentative at 43% approval. Venezuelan intervention polling shows similar resistance patterns. While Americans remain divided on Maduro's removal itself, they overwhelmingly oppose extended involvement or resource control. Nearly 3/4 express concern about becoming too entangled in Venezuelan affairs, including majority Republican opposition to prolonged engagement. Americans reject governing Venezuela temporarily and controlling petroleum assets by significant margins, indicating willingness to accept limited military action while rejecting broader imperial management. Greenland acquisition faces even more substantial public resistance. Multiple surveys show Americans opposing territorial seizure attempts by margins ranging from 27 to 45 percentage points, with diplomatic pressure against Denmark also facing decisive opposition. The fundamental concept of territorial expansion receives rejection by 30-point margins, with barely 1/5 of Americans supporting Western Hemispheric territorial rights claims. Perhaps most significantly for administrative priorities, overwhelming majorities believe insufficient attention focuses on domestic economic concerns that dominate voter attention. 3/4 of Americans, including majority Republican opinion, consider the administration inadequately focused on reducing consumer costs while pursuing foreign territorial expansion. This creates substantial political vulnerability as military adventures consume resources and attention that voters believe should address inflation and cost of living pressures. The constitutional implications extend beyond immediate territorial questions to fundamental issues of governmental authority and democratic oversight. Presidential war powers, expansion through law enforcement classifications, threatens to eliminate congressional consultation entirely while establishing precedents future administrations could exploit for unlimited military action. Senate leadership suggestions that legislative oversight threatens operational security represent extraordinary abandonment of constitutional principles, favoring executive authority over democratic accountability. These developments establish international precedents encouraging similar behavior from other major powers while undermining institutional frameworks maintaining global stability since World War II. When dominant nations explicitly reject international law and multilateral constraints, it signals to competing powers that unilateral military action constitutes acceptable statecraft, potentially triggering competitive escalation cycles that destabilize multiple regions simultaneously. The administration's preference for dramatic military demonstrations over sustained institutional engagement suggests any territorial expansion would prove difficult to maintain long-term. Imperial systems require extensive administrative capabilities and popular commitment that may exceed American resources, particularly given domestic political divisions and economic constraints facing voter attention. Whether this transformation represents emergence of sustainable American empire or acceleration toward chaotic international competition remains unclear. The outcomes will likely influence not only American governance structures, but global institutional arrangements for decades to come, as traditional diplomatic frameworks give way to direct power assertion with consequences extending far beyond any individual presidency. Thank you for joining us for this comprehensive examination. Continue following our coverage as these unprecedented developments reshape both American democracy and international order in ways that will define global politics for the foreseeable future.